It was supposed to be a dream come true. A sprawling 14-room farmhouse on 8 acres of Rhode Island countryside. A price so low the family couldn't believe their luck. Enough space for a husband, a wife, and their 5 daughters to build a life and finally breathe. They moved in on a cold January morning in 1971. By nightfall, something in the house knew they were there. What followed was not one night of terror, not 1 week, not 1 month. It was 10 years. And the movie they eventually made about it? That only scratched the surface. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. Tonight, we're going somewhere that has haunted me since I first heard the real story. Not the Hollywood version, not the theatrical version. The real one. The one the Perron family actually lived through. Because here's the thing about The Conjuring. It's a terrifying film. One of the best haunted house movies ever made. But the real family's experience was far more complex, far more unsettling, and in some ways, far more heartbreaking than anything you saw on screen. Let me take you back to the beginning. Roger and Carolyn Perron were a young couple with 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, ranging in age from just a few years old to early teens. Roger worked as a truck driver. Money was tight. When they found the old Arnold Estate farmhouse on Round Top Road in Harrisville, Rhode Island, it felt like the universe had finally handed them a break. The farmhouse was old, built in the 1700s. It had character. Wide plank floors, stone fireplaces, rolling fields that went on for acres. It also had a history that the realtor, wisely or unwisely, did not mention. There is a saying the family would later recall that the previous owner told them as he handed over the keys. For the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night. They laughed it off. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The strangeness began almost immediately, but gently, the way a predator circles before it strikes. Carolyn would notice that the broom went missing, or seemed to move from place to place on its own. She would hear the sound of something scraping against the kettle in the kitchen when no one was in there. She'd find small piles of dirt in the center of a newly cleaned kitchen floor. Easy to explain away. Old house, drafty rooms, kids playing tricks. But the girls started seeing things. Figures moving through the hallways at night. A woman in a white dress standing at the foot of a bed. A man with no eyes sitting in the corner of a room. For the most part, the children weren't terrified. Some of the spirits seemed almost benign, sad, lost, lingering. The girls even began to feel a kind of familiarity with some of them. But there were others that were not benign at all. Carolyn began to change. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, sudden fits of rage that weren't like her, a creeping exhaustion that never lifted, strange physical wounds appearing on her body overnight, bruises she couldn't explain. And one morning, she opened an orange from the kitchen counter, and it was bleeding. The house was over 200 years old and had been passed down through the same family for 8 generations. Carolyn researched the history of the home and discovered that many of those generations had died under mysterious or horrible circumstances. Several of the children had drowned in a nearby creek. One was murdered. A few had hanged themselves in the attic. This was not a house with one ghost. This was a house full of them. Of all the spirits the Perron family believed shared that house with them, one stood apart from the rest. One that wasn't lost or sad or merely restless. One that was angry. The family described her as a presence that focused its attention almost exclusively on Carolyn, a force that seemed to resent her, the way a previous owner resents a new tenant who dares to call the place her own. Whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position, said Andrea Perron, the oldest of the 5 daughters. The family also experienced other spirits that smelled like rotting flesh and would cause beds to rise off the floor. The attacks on Carolyn intensified as the months passed. She would wake with new bruises each morning. She felt stabbing pains in her legs, sharp and sudden, as if from a needle. She began to deteriorate in ways that doctors couldn't diagnose and couldn't explain. Roger watched his wife unraveling and didn't know what to do. He was a practical man, a truck driver. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed what he was seeing with his own eyes. After 2 years of escalating terror, Carolyn did what desperate people do. She reached out for help. In 1973, Ed and Lorraine Warren came to the farmhouse on Round Top Road. Ed Warren was a World War II veteran and a former police officer who became a self-styled demonologist. His wife, Lorraine, claimed to be a clairvoyant and a medium capable of communicating with supernatural entities. In 1952, they had founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, the oldest ghost hunting organization in New England. They had already investigated some of the most famous paranormal cases in American history. They had walked through the Amityville house. They had stood in rooms that made hardened men weep. They had seen things. But according to those who were present, the Harrisville farmhouse gave even the Warrens pause. Lorraine Warren walked through the property slowly, room by room. She paused in certain doorways. She stopped at the cellar stairs and would not go down. She told Carolyn what she sensed, an overwhelming darkness, layered and old, woven into the very wood and stone of the building. And then, Lorraine gave the darkness a name, Bathsheba. Bathsheba Sherman was a real person, born Bathsheba Thayer in Rhode Island in 1812. She married a farmer named Judson Sherman in 1844. She was a housewife while her husband worked the land. By all outward appearances, she was an ordinary 19th century farm wife, but the legends that had grown up around her name over the years were anything but ordinary. A neighbor's infant had died in her care under circumstances that were never fully explained. When the baby was examined, it was determined that the mortal wound was caused by a large sewing needle impaled at the base of the child's skull. Though the townspeople believed that Bathsheba had sacrificed the infant as an offering to the devil, due to insufficient evidence, she was never convicted of any wrongdoing. But the community's suspicion never left her. The whispers followed her for the rest of her life, and after her death, the legends only grew darker. Stories of witchcraft, of devil worship, of a woman who cursed the land she lived on. Lorraine Warren connected those legends to the pain she sensed in Carolyn's body, the needle-like wounds, the targeted attacks, and became convinced that it was Bathsheba's spirit tormenting the Perron family from beyond the grave. Carolyn Perron believed it too. The entity that stalked her through that farmhouse felt like something deeply personal, something that wanted her specifically, something that wanted her gone. The Warrens decided to perform a seance. Roger Perron objected. He had never wanted paranormal investigators in his home to begin with. He worried about his wife. He worried about his daughters. He wanted it all to stop. The investigators, the spirits, all of it. But Carolyn agreed. She was desperate. 10 years of her life were being consumed by whatever was in that house. She had to try something. The family gathered. The candles were lit. The ritual began. What happened next was witnessed by several people in that room and has been recounted consistently for over 50 years. During the seance, Carolyn Perron became possessed. She began to speak in tongues, a voice not her own, in a language no one recognized. Her chair began to rise from the ground. Andrea Perron claims to have secretly witnessed the seance. She said that her mother was smashed to the ground over and over again, banging her head against the hard floor. She was convinced in that moment that her mother had been killed. Roger Perron, watching his wife thrown across the room by something he couldn't see and couldn't fight, made a decision. He threw the Warrens out of the house, and yet the family stayed. They had sunk every penny they had into that farmhouse. They had nowhere else to go. According to Andrea, the family continued to live in the house due to financial instability until they were finally able to move in 1980, at which point the spirits were silenced and the hauntings ceased. 10 years. From 1971 to 1980. 10 years of living with whatever was in those walls. The moment they left, it stopped. Now I need to tell you something that The Conjuring never did. Something that adds a layer to the story that is more disturbing in a different way than anything that happened inside that farmhouse. Bathsheba Sherman, the woman named as the demonic villain of this entire story, the face of the evil that tormented the Perron family, the witch whose grave has been vandalized so many times that her original headstone was completely destroyed by horror fans making pilgrimages to spit on it, was almost certainly innocent of everything she was accused of. Historical investigative journalist Jem Rubio spent years researching the real Bathsheba Sherman after The Conjuring was released in 2013. What she found was damning, not of Bathsheba, but of the story itself. It is very important that people remember this. Stories about Bathsheba Sherman did not exist anywhere on record whatsoever on this earth until 1973, when they were made up, Rubio said. The legends of witchcraft, the infant murder, the satanic rituals, none of it appeared in any historical record prior to Carolyn Perron's own research into her home's history in the early 1970s. Bathsheba Sherman was born on March 10, 1812. She died on May 25, 1885, at the age of 72 after paralysis brought on by a stroke. She did not hang herself. She did not curse the land. She was eulogized by a priest and buried in consecrated ground, things that would not have happened if there were any accusations of witchcraft or wrongdoing in her lifetime. The real Bathsheba Sherman hasn't been able to rest in peace since. Decades after her death, her grave became a target. Vandals broke her headstone. People left occult offerings at the site. A crowdfunding campaign was eventually launched to raise money for a new headstone and a possible plaque to separate fact from fiction and explain that all of the accusations shared over the years were unfounded. So here's the question this story leaves us with. The Perron family experienced something real in that house. 7 people, a mother, a father, 5 daughters, across 10 years, reported consistent, terrifying phenomena. Something was in that farmhouse. Something focused its energy on Carolyn Perron in ways that broke her physically and psychologically. But was it Bathsheba Sherman? Or did a desperate family, a grieving mother, and a pair of paranormal investigators reach for the nearest dark legend and accidentally destroy the reputation of an innocent woman who had been in the ground for nearly a century? The house still stands on Round Top Road in Harrisville, Rhode Island. Current owners have reported a woman in a wedding dress passing through the hallways. Guests who pay to spend the night describe objects moving on their own and voices in empty rooms. Whatever is in that farmhouse, it hasn't left. It's still there, still waiting. The Conjuring made over $300 million at the box office. It launched one of the biggest horror franchises in Hollywood history. And at its heart was the genuine, documented, decade-long ordeal of a real family who moved into a house on a quiet Rhode Island road and never truly felt safe again. Andrea Perron, the oldest of the 5 daughters, eventually wrote 3 books about what her family experienced, and she has said that growing up in that house fundamentally changed who she became. She also said something that has stayed with me. This house was an absolute portal, cleverly disguised as a farmhouse. Whether you believe in demons, restless spirits, or psychological phenomena shaped by an old house and overwhelming fear, the Perron family's 10 years of terror were real to them in every way that matters. And somewhere in a quiet Rhode Island cemetery, a woman named Bathsheba Sherman finally has a new headstone. She's still waiting too, to be remembered as what she actually was. An ordinary woman, a farmer's wife, nothing more. Thank you so much for being here tonight on Unexplained Encounters. If this story got under your skin, and I think it did, please subscribe, leave me a comment below with your thoughts, and share this with someone who loves the real stories behind the horror. And the big question for tonight's comments: do you believe the Perron family was genuinely haunted? Or was there another explanation for what they experienced for 10 years? I'll see you next time. Sleep well.